Sarah Mitchell had always been drawn to the quiet corners of the shooting range. At 24, she worked as a data analyst for a tech company, but her evenings belonged to the precision sport that had captured her heart 2 years ago. The Metropolitan Shooting Club wasn't fancy, just concrete walls and fluorescent lights, but it was her sanctuary. She noticed him on a Tuesday evening in March. An older man, maybe in his 70s, with silver hair and weathered hands that moved with deliberate precision. He occupied the lane next to hers, and while other shooters chatted and joked between rounds, he worked in focused silence. His shots were impossibly tight groups, so consistent that Sarah found herself glancing over, despite trying to concentrate on her own technique. "Nice grouping," he said quietly after watching her complete a string of shots at the 25-yard target. His voice carried a slight accent she couldn't place, perhaps Eastern European. Sarah looked at her target through the scope. Her shots were scattered across a 4-inch circle, respectable for her skill level but nowhere near his precision. "Thanks, but I've got a long way to go," she replied, lowering her rifle. "Everyone does," he said with a slight smile. "I'm Victor." Sarah. She noticed how he held his rifle, the way his breathing seemed to control everything about his stance. "You shoot like you've been doing this forever." Victor's eyes held stories she couldn't read. "Long time, yes. You have good instincts, but you're fighting your breath instead of working with it." Without asking permission, he stepped closer and demonstrated a breathing technique she'd never seen before. Inhale, let out half, hold, squeeze, follow through. His explanation was simple, but when Sarah tried it, her next group tightened dramatically. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" she asked, genuinely curious. Victor was already packing his gear. "Different places, different times," he said, shouldering his case. "Same time next week?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure why. There was something about Victor that made her want to learn more, not just about shooting, but about the quiet intensity that seemed to surround him like armor. Over the following weeks, their Tuesday evening sessions became routine. Victor never offered formal instruction, but his casual observations transformed Sarah's shooting. He taught her to read wind that she couldn't feel, to adjust for humidity changes that seemed invisible, to find her natural point of aim through repetition that bordered on meditation. "Why do you know so much about this?" Sarah asked one evening after placing 5 shots within a 2-inch circle at 50 yards, a personal best. Victor's hands paused as he cleaned his rifle. "When something keeps you alive, you learn it completely," he said simply. Sarah wanted to ask more, but Victor had already shifted the conversation to her trigger control. She sensed boundaries around his past that she wasn't meant to cross, at least not yet. What struck her most was his teaching style. Victor never told her what to do directly. Instead, he would mention small details about environmental factors, share brief stories about patience and precision, or demonstrate tiny adjustments that somehow made enormous differences in her accuracy. It was as if he was passing along knowledge that had been earned through experience she couldn't imagine. "You're getting better fast," commented Jake, another regular at the range watching Sarah's latest target. "What's your secret?" Sarah glanced toward Victor, who was methodically checking his equipment with the same focused attention he brought to everything. "Good teacher," she said, though she realized she still knew almost nothing about the man who was transforming her understanding of marksmanship. Victor overheard and looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. In that moment, Sarah caught something in his eyes that suggested teaching her meant more to him than she understood. There was a weight there, a sense of purpose that seemed disproportionate to helping an amateur shooter improve her hobby. As weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself thinking about Victor's cryptic comments and the way he approached shooting with almost reverent precision. Whatever he had done before, wherever he had learned these skills, she sensed it involved stakes much higher than competition scores or personal satisfaction. But Victor shared only what he chose to share, and Sarah learned to value the knowledge he offered without pushing for the stories behind it. She had no idea that her casual Tuesday evening lessons were being guided by someone whose name appeared in classified military files, or that the techniques he taught her had once meant the difference between life and death, in conflicts she'd only read about in history books. All she knew was that under Victor's quiet guidance, she was becoming a marksman far beyond what she had ever imagined possible. 6 months into their unusual mentorship, Sarah began noticing details about Victor that didn't fit the profile of a typical shooting enthusiast. His equipment was pristine but showed signs of serious use. Not the careful maintenance of a hobbyist, but the urgent care of someone whose life had depended on functionality. His rifle case bore small scratches and wear marks that spoke of travel to places where such equipment served purposes beyond sport. During their sessions, Victor would sometimes pause mid-sentence, his head tilting slightly as if listening to sounds no one else could hear. His awareness of his surroundings was absolute. He knew when someone entered the range before the door finished opening, could identify approaching footsteps without turning around, and positioned himself so he always had clear sight lines to exits. "You were military, weren't you?" Sarah asked one evening after watching him automatically check the range's corners and exits upon arrival. Victor's hands continued their methodical cleaning of his rifle barrel. "Many people have military service," he said, neither confirming nor denying. "But not like yours," Sarah pressed gently. "The way you move, the way you watch everything, that's not regular military training." For a moment, Victor's cleaning motion stopped. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her understand why he rarely made direct eye contact. "Some training stays with you longer than others," he said finally. That evening, Victor introduced her to advanced techniques that seemed far beyond what any civilian sport demanded. He taught her to calculate bullet drop at extreme distances, to account for the Coriolis effect of Earth's rotation, to read environmental conditions with scientific precision. When Sarah asked why such knowledge mattered for their range sessions, Victor simply said, "Precision is precision. Half measures teach bad habits." The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging session when Sarah was struggling with a series of shots at 75 yards. Her groups were inconsistent and frustration was affecting her breathing. "Tell me about the hardest shot you ever made," she said, hoping Victor's story might contain a lesson about overcoming difficulty. Victor set down his rifle and was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Sarajevo, 1994, winter. Target was 800 meters moving. Wind gusting unpredictably between buildings." He paused. His eyes focused on something far beyond the range walls. "Shot had to be perfect. Many people's safety depended on it." Sarah felt her breath catch. 800 meters was nearly half a mile. An almost impossible shot under ideal conditions, let alone in urban warfare conditions. "One bullet," Victor continued quietly. "Everything I had learned, everything I was trained for, came down to reading the wind between destroyed buildings, calculating the drop through cold air, and trusting that when I squeezed the trigger, the shot would go exactly where it needed to go." "Did you make it?" Sarah asked, though Victor's presence suggested he had. "The bullet found its mark," he said simply. "But the important thing wasn't the distance or the conditions. It was that everything I had practiced, every small detail I had mastered, came together in that moment. Training becomes instinct, and instinct doesn't fail when everything depends on it." Victor picked up his rifle again, but his lesson had shifted. For the rest of the evening, he guided Sarah through mental exercises about pressure and focus, about trusting her preparation when conditions weren't perfect. Her shooting improved not just in accuracy, but in consistency under stress. Walking to their cars afterward, Sarah realized that Victor had just shared more about his past than in all their previous sessions combined. The revelation that he had been a sniper in one of the most brutal conflicts in recent history recontextualized everything she had learned from him. Every technique, every small adjustment, every emphasis on precision had been forged in circumstances where failure meant death. "Why are you teaching me?" she asked as they reached the parking lot. Victor paused beside his truck, an older model that was immaculately maintained despite its age. "Because knowledge dies with the person who holds it," he said. "And because you listen not just to what is said, but to what is meant." That night, Sarah researched the siege of Sarajevo, learning about the snipers who had terrorized the city and the counter-snipers who had fought to protect civilians. She began to understand that Victor's quiet precision and constant awareness weren't quirks of personality but survival mechanisms developed during years of the most demanding combat imaginable. She also began to realize that her Tuesday evening lessons had been something far more significant than improving her marksmanship hobby. Victor had been passing along skills and knowledge that represented decades of experience in the most serious application of their shared craft. After Victor's revelation about Sarajevo, their training sessions took on new intensity. Sarah found herself approaching each lesson with deeper respect, understanding that she was receiving instruction from someone who had operated at the highest levels of military precision. Victor seemed to sense her shift in perspective and began sharing more advanced concepts that pushed her capabilities far beyond recreational shooting. He introduced her to concepts she had never heard of: mil-dot calculations for range estimation, Kentucky windage for quick adjustments, the difference between point-blank range and maximum effective range. These weren't terms used at civilian shooting ranges, but Victor explained them with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had relied on such knowledge when lives hung in the balance. Understanding ballistics isn't about memorizing charts, Victor explained during one session, sketching trajectory curves on a piece of paper. It's about seeing the path your bullet will take before you fire it. The bullet knows physics. Your job is to know physics better. Sarah's notebook filled with observations and measurements that would have seemed obsessive to other shooters. Victor taught her to record atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and even barometric trends. At first, the data seemed overwhelming, but gradually she began to see patterns in how these factors affected her shots. "Why such detail for range shooting?" she asked one evening after spending 20 minutes documenting environmental conditions. "Because when conditions change rapidly, you need to adjust rapidly," Victor replied. "In war, weather doesn't wait for convenient timing. You learn to shoot in rain, snow, heat, cold, high altitude, sea level. Each condition teaches you something about how your rifle behaves." Victor's stories began to emerge more freely, though always as lessons rather than reminiscences. He spoke of shots taken in dense fog where targets were barely visible, of calculating bullet drop in extreme cold where ammunition performed differently, of making precision shots while under fire himself. Each story contained technical details that Sarah dutifully recorded, understanding that these weren't war stories but masterclasses in advanced marksmanship. One evening, Victor brought a different rifle to the range, an older model with distinctive modifications that Sarah didn't recognize. The scope was unlike anything she had seen, and the stock showed careful customization that spoke of professional use. "This is what I carried," Victor said simply, setting the rifle carefully in its rest. "Not the same rifle, but the same type, same modifications. I thought you should understand what real precision equipment looks like." The rifle was heavier than Sarah's sporting model, built for accuracy over convenience. Victor demonstrated its capabilities at ranges that tested the limits of their indoor facility, placing shots with mechanical precision that made her own best efforts look amateurish. "May I try it?" Sarah asked, drawn to the weapon despite feeling intimidated by its obvious pedigree. Victor nodded and guided her through the unfamiliar controls. The rifle felt different in her hands, more substantial, as if it carried the weight of its intended purpose. When she fired her first shot, the recoil and sound were more pronounced, but the precision was immediately apparent. "Feel the difference?" Victor asked as Sarah examined her target through the scope. Her shot had landed exactly where she had aimed, with an accuracy that exceeded anything she had achieved with her own equipment. "It's like the rifle knows where to go," Sarah said, genuinely amazed. "Tools matter," Victor explained, "but they only amplify what the shooter brings to them. A perfect rifle in unprepared hands is worthless. Prepared hands with an imperfect rifle can still accomplish the mission." As weeks passed, Sarah noticed that Victor was teaching her more than marksmanship. His lessons included fieldcraft skills that seemed far beyond civilian shooting requirements. He taught her to move quietly, to observe without being noticed, to think tactically about positioning and escape routes. When she questioned the relevance of such skills, Victor's response was characteristically indirect. "A complete marksman understands the environment completely," he said. "Shooting is only one part of the equation. Getting to the shooting position safely, remaining undetected, and leaving successfully are equally important skills." Sarah began to understand that Victor wasn't just teaching her to shoot accurately. He was transmitting a complete philosophy of precision, patience, and tactical thinking that represented decades of development under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Every lesson built upon previous knowledge, creating a foundation of skills that far exceeded anything available through conventional instruction. The realization both thrilled and sobered her. She was receiving training that few people in the world had access to, guided by someone whose expertise had been proven in the ultimate testing ground of armed conflict. But with that knowledge came an understanding of the serious responsibilities that accompanied such skills. Nearly a year into their mentorship, Sarah had transformed from an enthusiastic amateur into a marksman whose capabilities drew attention from other shooters at the range. Her consistency and precision at long distances sparked conversations about competitive shooting. Though Sarah found herself more interested in the technical mastery Victor continued to share than in formal competition. During this period, Victor began revealing more about his background, though always in carefully measured portions. He had served with an elite unit that operated across multiple theaters during the conflicts of the 1990s. His role had been counter-sniper operations, protecting civilian populations and allied forces from enemy marksmen who used their skills to terrorize and control. The worst snipers, Victor explained during one of their sessions, are those who target innocent people. They use fear as a weapon, making entire populations afraid to move freely. Our job was to eliminate that threat. Sarah learned that Victor's unit had been deployed to Bosnia, Kosovo, and other regional conflicts where precision marksmen on both sides had turned urban areas into deadly chess games. Enemy snipers would establish positions that controlled key intersections, markets, or routes to water sources, effectively laying siege to civilian populations through the threat of sudden death. "How did you find them?" Sarah asked, fascinated by the tactical complexity of such operations. "Patience and pattern recognition," Victor replied. "Most snipers develop habits. They prefer certain types of positions, specific times of day, particular angles of attack. Study their behavior long enough, and you can predict where they will be." Victor taught Sarah to think like both predator and prey, understanding how a skilled sniper would select positions and how an equally skilled opponent would anticipate and counter those choices. These lessons went far beyond marksmanship, involving psychology, terrain analysis, and strategic thinking that Sarah found intellectually challenging. "Show me how you would approach this," Victor said one evening, spreading a detailed topographical map across their shooting bench. The map showed an urban area with buildings, streets, and elevation markers that created a three-dimensional puzzle. Sarah studied the map, applying concepts Victor had taught her about sightlines, concealment, and escape routes. She identified several positions that would provide good fields of fire while offering protection and multiple exit options. "Good choices," Victor said, marking her selections. "Now, if you were hunting the sniper in those positions, where would you look?" This became their new form of training. Victor would present tactical scenarios and Sarah would work through the logic of both offensive and defensive positioning. Her understanding deepened as she learned to think several moves ahead, anticipating how a skilled opponent would react to various tactical decisions. One evening, Victor brought photographs to their session. The images showed urban destruction that Sarah recognized from news coverage of the Balkan conflicts, but Victor's perspective revealed details that news cameras had missed. This building, Victor pointed to a partially destroyed structure, was where an enemy sniper operated for 3 weeks. He controlled this intersection, preventing civilians from reaching the marketplace. 15 people died trying to cross this street. Sarah studied the photograph, seeing how the building's damage created perfect concealment while maintaining clear sight lines to the intersection below. "How did you stop him?" she asked. Victor pointed to another building, barely visible in the photograph's background. "Counter position, 400 meters. Required a shot through a gap between concrete barriers, accounting for wind that swirled unpredictably between the ruins. Took 2 days of observation to understand his pattern and find the right moment. 2 days of waiting, 2 days of watching, learning his habits, calculating the shot. When the moment came, there would be no second chance. He was skilled enough that missing would mean he would relocate immediately, and finding him again might take weeks." Victor's description painted a picture of warfare unlike anything Sarah had imagined. This wasn't the dramatic action of movies, but a methodical, almost scientific approach to life and death confrontations. Every decision required careful analysis, and success depended on superior preparation rather than luck or aggression. As these lessons continued, Sarah began to understand the psychological weight Victor carried. Each story represented not just a tactical victory, but a life or death decision that had saved civilian lives while ending another human being's existence. The precision Victor taught her had been developed under circumstances where failure meant innocent people would continue to die. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked one evening after a particularly detailed discussion of counter-sniper tactics. Victor was quiet for a long time, his hands methodically cleaning his rifle with the ritual precision she had come to recognize as his way of processing difficult thoughts. "Regret the necessity, not the action," he said finally. "Every shot I took saved lives that the enemy sniper would have taken. In war, sometimes the moral choice is the one that prevents greater suffering." Sarah realized that Victor's careful, methodical approach to everything wasn't just professional habit but a way of honoring the weight of his experience. The precision he demanded, the attention to detail he insisted upon, the patience he demonstrated were all expressions of respect for the serious responsibilities that accompanied such skills. 18 months into their training relationship, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would test everything Victor had taught her. Her younger brother, Michael, a wildlife photographer, had been working on a documentary project in a remote mountainous region when communication with his team was lost. Search and rescue efforts had been hindered by severe weather, conditions and treacherous terrain that made helicopter access impossible. Sarah immediately took leave from her job and drove to the Search Coordination Center, where she learned that Michael's last known position was in an area notorious for its challenging topography and unpredictable weather patterns. Ground teams had been unable to reach the location due to recent snowfall that had made the access routes impassable. The search coordinator, a veteran mountain rescue specialist named Tom Rodriguez, was coordinating efforts from a base camp established at the highest accessible point. When Sarah arrived and explained her connection to the missing photographer, Tom welcomed her assistance but warned that civilian volunteers would be limited to support roles due to the dangerous conditions. "My brother knows these mountains," Sarah told Tom. "If he's alive, he'll be trying to signal for help, but the terrain makes it hard to spot signals from ground level." Tom nodded grimly. "We've got aerial searches planned as soon as the weather clears, but visibility has been near zero for 3 days. We need eyes on those ridge lines, but getting spotters into position safely is the problem." That evening, Sarah called Victor and explained the situation. Without hesitation, he offered to drive up and assist with the search efforts. When he arrived at base camp the next morning, Sarah introduced him to Tom as an experienced marksman who might be able to help with long-range observation. Victor quietly assessed the tactical situation with the same methodical approach he brought to everything. He studied topographical maps, weather reports, and the search patterns that had already been attempted. His questions about sightlines, elevation advantages, and optimal observation positions impressed Tom, who recognized expertise when he encountered it. "The problem," Tom explained, pointing to the map, "is that our best observation points are here and here, but we can't get teams to those positions safely in current conditions. From ground level, we're missing huge sections of the search area." Victor studied the map carefully, applying the terrain analysis skills he had taught Sarah. "What about this ridgeline?" he asked, indicating a position that would provide commanding views of the area where Michael's team had last been seen. "That's beyond our current perimeter," Tom replied. "Getting there would require technical climbing skills and equipment we don't have immediately available." "I can get there," Victor said simply, "and I can observe the entire search area from that position." Sarah understood immediately what Victor was proposing. The observation position he had identified would require not just climbing skills, but the ability to remain stable and focused at altitude while conducting detailed visual searches across vast distances. These were exactly the types of skills his military background had developed. Tom was hesitant to authorize such a mission, but Victor's calm competence and obvious expertise gradually convinced him that this might be their best option for expanding the search area effectively. "You'll need support," Tom said finally. "Someone who can assist with equipment and maintain radio contact." "I'll go," Sarah volunteered immediately. Victor's expression showed concern, but Sarah pressed her case. "You've been training me for 18 months. I understand the equipment, I can assist with observations, and I know my brother better than anyone here. I'll recognize his signals if we spot any." After considerable discussion, Tom agreed to the mission, though he insisted on extensive safety protocols and emergency backup plans. Sarah and Victor spent the remainder of the day preparing equipment and reviewing the approach route that would get them to the observation position Victor had identified. That evening, as they checked their gear one final time, Victor's demeanor reminded Sarah of their range sessions when he was preparing for particularly challenging shots. His focus was absolute, his preparation methodical, and his confidence quietly reassuring. "This is different from the range," Victor warned her. "Environmental conditions will be extreme. Visibility may be limited, and we'll be searching for subtle signs across huge distances. Everything I've taught you about patience and systematic observation will be important." Sarah nodded, understanding that the theoretical skills Victor had been teaching her were about to be tested under real-world conditions, where success could mean the difference between life and death for her brother. "Are you ready for this?" Victor asked, his question encompassing not just the physical demands of the mission, but the psychological pressure of applying their training when the stakes were genuinely high. "You've prepared me," Sarah replied, surprising herself with how confident she felt despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Victor's slight smile carried approval and something else she couldn't quite identify. Later she would realize it was pride in seeing his student ready to apply their training to protect someone she cared about, just as he had once done in far more dangerous circumstances. Sarah and Victor began their ascent at dawn, carrying specialized optics and communication equipment that would allow them to conduct systematic searches of the vast wilderness area where Michael's team had disappeared. The climb required 3 hours of careful movement through terrain that became increasingly challenging as they gained altitude. Victor moved with the quiet efficiency Sarah had observed during their training sessions, but now she understood that his careful attention to footing, his constant awareness of weather conditions, and his methodical pace reflected skills developed during military operations in similarly demanding environments. When they reached the observation position Victor had selected, Sarah was amazed by the commanding view it provided. From their elevated vantage point, they could see across miles of wilderness that ground-based search teams couldn't access effectively. The terrain below them stretched in complex patterns of ridges, valleys, and forest that would challenge even experienced searchers. Victor immediately began establishing a systematic search pattern, dividing the visible area into overlapping sectors that could be examined methodically. He set up his spotting scope with the same precision Sarah had watched him apply to rifle preparation, adjusting for atmospheric conditions and optimizing the equipment for long-range observation. "Remember what I taught you about reading landscapes," Victor said as he handed Sarah a second set of optics. "Look for anything that doesn't belong. Unnatural colors, straight lines, patterns that break the natural flow of the terrain." For the first 2 hours, their search revealed nothing unusual. Sarah methodically scanned her assigned sectors, applying the patience and systematic approach Victor had drilled into her during their range sessions. The scale of the search area was overwhelming, but Victor's training had prepared her to work through complex visual tasks without losing focus. During their 3rd hour of observation, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. In a narrow valley about 2 miles from their position, she spotted what appeared to be an unusual reflection that didn't match the surrounding natural features. "Victor," she called softly. "Sector 7, about 15 degrees left of that distinctive rock formation." Victor shifted his scope to the area Sarah had indicated and studied it carefully. After several minutes of observation, he nodded slowly. "Good eyes. That reflection is definitely artificial. Could be equipment. Could be a signal mirror." They maintained observation on the area while Victor radioed their coordinates to the base camp team. Tom Rodriguez's voice crackled through their radio with excitement as he confirmed that the location was within the search area where Michael's team was believed to have been working. "Can you maintain visual contact while we dispatch a ground team?" Tom asked. "Affirmative," Victor replied. "We have clear sight lines and good communication position." As they continued watching the area, Sarah spotted movement near the reflection source. Through her scope, she could see what appeared to be a person moving deliberately among the rocks, clearly attempting to create visible signals for potential rescuers. "That's Michael," Sarah said with certainty, recognizing her brother's distinctive jacket and movement patterns even at the extreme distance. Victor confirmed the sighting and radioed detailed coordinates to guide the ground rescue team. However, the approaching weather suggested that reaching the location before nightfall would be challenging, and the forecast indicated that deteriorating conditions might make rescue attempts impossible for several days. Ground team estimates 4 hours to reach that position, Tom's voice reported through the radio. Weather Service is predicting heavy snow starting this afternoon. We may have a narrow window for extraction. Victor studied the weather patterns building on the horizon with the same analytical approach he applied to tactical situations. Weather will hit sooner than forecast, he told Sarah. Mountain conditions change faster than valley predictions. As if to confirm his assessment, the wind began shifting, carrying the scent of snow and creating atmospheric conditions that would soon make their observation position untenable. Victor's military experience in extreme environments had taught him to read weather signs that civilian forecasters often missed. We need to guide them more precisely, Victor said, studying the terrain between the rescue team's position and Michael's location. The standard approach route will put them in danger if weather hits before they complete the rescue. Victor radioed detailed tactical guidance to the ground team, using his terrain analysis skills to identify a safer approach route that would provide better protection from the incoming storm. His instructions reflected not just geographical knowledge, but an understanding of how to move efficiently through challenging terrain under time pressure. How do you know all this? Sarah asked as she watched Victor coordinate the rescue. Effort with professional competence that went far beyond civilian search and rescue. Experience. Because I've guided people through dangerous territory when time was critical, Victor replied simply. Different situation, same principles. Read the terrain, understand the threats, find the safest path to the objective. As the rescue operation continued, Sarah realized that her brother's survival might depend not just on the ground team's courage and skill, but on Victor's ability to apply military tactical knowledge to civilian emergency response. The observation mission had evolved into something that required exactly the type of expertise Victor had developed during his years of military service. The afternoon's events were testing everything Victor had taught her, but more importantly, they were revealing the practical applications of skills she had assumed were primarily theoretical. Victor's training had been preparing her not just for precision shooting, but for the type of clear thinking and systematic problem-solving that could save lives when conditions became critical. The rescue operation reached its critical phase as weather conditions deteriorated faster than anyone had anticipated. Victor's prediction about mountain weather proved accurate as snow began falling heavily, reducing visibility and making the rescue team's approach increasingly dangerous. From their observation position, Sarah and Victor could see the ground team struggling through worsening conditions while still an hour away from Michael's location. Victor made a decision that revealed the full extent of his military background. Sarah, I need you to maintain radio contact with base camp and keep visual on your brother's position. I'm going to provide direct guidance to the rescue team. What do you mean? Sarah asked, though Victor's tone suggested he was already committed to a course of action. There's a better route that will get them there faster and safer, but it requires guidance from someone who can see the full terrain picture, Victor explained, shouldering his pack. I'm going to move to an intermediate position where I can guide them directly through the most efficient approach. Sarah realized that Victor was proposing to leave their secure observation post and move through dangerous terrain to provide tactical support for the rescue operation. This wasn't civilian search and rescue anymore. This was Victor applying military operational planning to save her brother's life. That's incredibly dangerous, Sarah protested, understanding that Victor would be exposing himself to the same weather conditions that were threatening the rescue team. Less dangerous than letting the rescue team attempt the standard route in these conditions. Victor replied with the calm certainty Sarah had learned to recognize as his response to critical situations. Victor spent 10 minutes briefing Sarah on maintaining their communication links and continuing observation duties. His instructions were precise and thorough, reflecting his experience in delegating critical responsibilities during high-stakes operations. If something happens to me, you guide the rescue team using everything I've taught you about reading terrain and calculating approaches, Victor said, his words carrying the weight of genuine preparation for the possibility that he might not return. As Victor began his descent toward the intermediate position he had identified, Sarah understood that she was witnessing the same type of tactical decision-making that had defined his military career. He was accepting personal risk to optimize the chances of mission success, applying skills developed during conflicts where such decisions were matters of life and death. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah listened to Victor's radio communications as he guided the rescue team through a route that avoided the most dangerous terrain features while maintaining progress toward Michael's position. His guidance was precise and professional, reflecting intimate knowledge of how to move safely through hazardous environments under pressure. Rescue team, this is Overwatch. Victor's voice came through the radio with the calm authority of someone accustomed to directing critical operations. Adjust your route 15 degrees north to avoid the exposed ridge section. Weather conditions are deteriorating faster than safe passage allows through your current approach. The rescue team leader's responses revealed growing respect for Victor's tactical guidance. Overwatch, your route recommendations have been extremely accurate. Are you military? Experienced in mountain operations, Victor replied diplomatically, maintaining the operational security habits that were apparently second nature to him. As the rescue team finally reached Michael's position, Sarah watched through her scope as her brother was successfully located and prepared for evacuation. Michael appeared to be conscious and mobile, though clearly exhausted from his ordeal in the wilderness. Victor's voice came through the radio with instructions for the extraction route that would get the rescue team and Michael to safety, despite the continuing deterioration of weather conditions. His tactical coordination of the operation had transformed what might have been a dangerous night rescue into a successful mission, completed before conditions became truly life-threatening. When Victor finally returned to Sarah's position hours later, he appeared tired but satisfied with the outcome. As they prepared for their own descent to base camp, Sarah realized that the evening's events had revealed capabilities and experience that went far beyond anything Victor had shared during their training sessions. "You're not just a former sniper," Sarah said as they began their careful descent through the snow. "You were special operations, weren't you?" Victor's slight smile suggested confirmation without providing details. "Training has many applications," he said simply. "Tonight it helped bring your brother home safely." During their descent, Sarah reflected on the 18 months of training that had prepared her for the evening's events. Victor's seemingly excessive emphasis on patience, systematic observation, terrain analysis, and tactical thinking had all proven essential when applied to a real-world crisis where lives depended on precise execution. Back at base camp, as Michael was checked by medical personnel and pronounced to be in good condition despite his ordeal, Sarah finally understood the true nature of Victor's gift to her. He hadn't just taught her to shoot accurately. He had transmitted a way of thinking about complex problems under pressure that could be applied to any situation where precision and clear judgment mattered. "Thank you," she told Victor as they watched Michael, reunited with the rescue team. "For everything." Victor's response carried the quiet satisfaction of someone who had successfully passed along knowledge that had proven its worth when tested. "Now you understand why precision matters," he said, "and why the most important target is always the one that protects what you care about most." In that moment, Sarah realized that Victor's patient mentorship had been preparing her not just for marksmanship, but for the kind of clear thinking and steady performance that could save lives when circumstances demanded absolute precision. The legendary sniper had taught her that true accuracy was about much more than hitting distant targets. It was about applying focused skills to protect what mattered most when the stakes couldn't be higher.